We're going to get started here. Let's see, this is 2 days, 2 nights sleeping before Christmas is what Cora was talking about today. So I guess you just count down on sleeping and then it's Christmas. So we're ready for that. The first song tonight, is going to be number 23, Great Is Thy Faithfulness. And then devotional time is going to have Stephen Rogers come up on that. So welcome everyone here again and at home. We'll start off with singing. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above, join with all nature in manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow, blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. The invitation song is going to be number 586. 586. And Stephen, ready for you. Thank you.
Well, we got a special day approaching, don't we? A very meaningful day to many of us. December 25th. It's the anniversary of the day that Washington and his men crossed the Delaware and surprised those Hessian soldiers in Trenton. Oh, what day were you guys thinking about? But I read a lot of American history, and this is probably something a lot of you guys know of, is George Washington's crossing the Delaware. And this was a significant part of American history because we were losing. We were being defeated. The British had the money, they had the numbers, they had the tactics, and we were suffering defeat after defeat. Our men's morale was at an all-time low. And George Washington knew he needed a victory, and he needed to bring the morale of the men back up. And so that night, it was actually, technically it was December 26th, but they loaded up those boats. 2,400 of them crossed the Delaware, half-freezing river, and surprised the Hessian troops in their winter encampment that night. They were still probably hungover from the night before their celebrations. Weren't expecting it. They were locked up for the winter, but George Washington led that. Really wasn't much of a tactical victory, but it did bring the morale of his troops up. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about was actually something that occurred 244 years ago today, and that is the publication of Thomas Paine's, you might recognize him from the pamphlet, The Common Sense, or Common Sense. He wrote a pamphlet called The American Crisis, and would like to read that entry here. He said, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price on its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet it and to repulse it. I love the man that can smile in trouble, that can gather strength from distress, and grow brave by reflection. 'Tis the business of little minds to shrink, but he whose heart is firm and whose conscience approves his conduct will pursue his principles unto death." And so Thomas Paine put out that publication, and George Washington got a hold of it. And that night on December 25th, he had this pamphlet read aloud to his troops. Now, these men were of low morale. I can't think of better words to have brought their morale up that night. And no doubt this had a role to play in that victory that night. They crossed the Delaware. They were surrounding Trenton by 9:30 a.m. that morning. And it's very significant to that war. Well, that being said, what kind of soldiers are we? He mentioned there's a lot of biblical principles in that pamphlet there. And I want to go through some of those this evening. First of all, he went over the character of the soldier. He said that there's a summer soldier, and then there's a sunshine patriot, and we don't want to be either of those things. You know, James in chapter 1 and verse 8, he said, "A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways." He wants to hold on to the fight, but he also wants to hold on to the comfort of home. He can't hold on to both of those. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Numbers chapter 13 and verse 33 gives us an account. And you'll probably remember the spies that entered into the land of promise and came back with that evil report, and they said, "We were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." So they saw themselves, that was their perception of themselves, that they were grasshoppers, and just assumed that those giants, the sons of Anak, would see them as grasshoppers as well. Well, those were summer soldiers. Those were men that were okay to fight when the sun was shining, but not so okay once the ground was frozen over. But then we have the winter soldier. In 1 Chronicles 28 and verse 20, in that chapter we have David and his son Solomon on the topic of the temple that is to be built. And I'd like to say that David in verse 20 encouraged Solomon to be a winter soldier when he said, "Be strong and of good courage, and do it." Get the job done. Do it. Fear not, nor be dismayed, for the Lord God, even my God, is with thee, and he shall not fail thee until all the work be fulfilled of the house of the Lord. And so I'd like to say there, David was encouraging his son to be a winter soldier. Also, we read in 1 Corinthians similar words, 1 Corinthians 15:58. Be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain. That's another point that separates the winter soldier from the summer soldier, is he knows his labor is not in vain. So that's the character of the soldier. We want to be winter soldiers, willing to fight when the ground is frozen. And going back to Washington, you know, a year later in 1777 was that winter in Valley Forge. It was much, much worse than the winter of 1776. And those men were loyal to Washington. It was said that many of them did not have shoes that winter. And so that victory paid off for him. So the character of the soldier, it's important. We want to be winter soldiers. But second of all, we see the crisis the soldier faces. Thomas Paine was outlining the American crisis. Now, what was the crisis of the soldier in 1776? It was that his freedom weighed in the balance. So too does our freedom weigh in the balance. In Ephesians 6 and verse 12, we're told that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. These kinds of things are not easy to overcome spiritually. We've got to be winter soldiers, conscious of that fight that we are waging against those powers. And unfortunately, we have too many Tories in this world. If you know what Tories were back during the American Revolution, they were those American colonists that had a loyalty to Britain, that were unwilling to fight for their freedom. And we've got too many people that are unwilling to fight for their freedom spiritually. We need to recognize the crisis is that our spiritual freedom weighs in the balance. But finally, we have the consolation of the soldier, and I want to read those words again that Thomas Paine said about consolation. I think he was reading the Bible, and he was influenced by the Bible when he wrote this pamphlet. Because he says, "Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only that gives everything its value, and heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods." Heaven knows how to put a proper price on its goods, and we have that consolation. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 4 through 7, Paul writes, "Who comforteth us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble, by the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God. For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also aboundeth by Christ. And whether we be afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation, which is effectual in the enduring of the same sufferings which we also suffer. Or whether we be comforted, it is for your consolation and salvation. And our hope of you is steadfast, knowing that as ye are partakers of the sufferings, so shall ye also be of the consolation." So there's a consolation that awaits us if we stay in the fight, if we're winter soldiers. We're also told in Hebrews, by the Hebrew writer in chapter 6 and verse 18, that by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have a strong consolation who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope that is set before us, which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both steadfast and sure, and which entereth into that within the veil. So we have a hope to hold on to, a strong consolation. We need to be, that's another thing that separates the winter soldier from the sunshine patriot. We understand that what we're fighting for is far greater than any comfort we can have in this earth. This evening, I want to ask you, what kind of soldier are you? We are certain to face difficulty. We are already seeing less serious things being censored by social media, the mainstream media, and things like that. I see it going even further. I see maybe the potential will be deplatformed when we've talked about that. Are we going to be strong and teach the truth no matter what? Are we going to fight the good fight no matter what, even when the ground is frozen? If you have any need this evening, please come forward and as we stand and sing.
Have thine affections been nailed to the cross? Is thy heart right with God? Dost thou count all things for Jesus but loss? Is thy heart right with God? Is thy heart right with God? Washed in the crimson flood, cleansed and made holy, humble and lowly, right in the sight of God. Hast thou dominion o'er self and o'er sin? Is thy heart right with God? Over all evil without and within, is thy heart right with God? Is thy heart right with God? Washed in the crimson flood, cleansed and made holy, humble and lowly, right in the sight of God. Are all thy powers under Jesus' control? Is thy heart right with God? Does he each moment abide in thy soul? Is thy heart right with God? Is thy heart right with God? Washed in the crimson flood, cleansed and made holy, humble and lowly, right in the sight of God. I want to thank all that have been here or that are here that could be here, and for those of you at home or watching or on the road listening, that's great too. We're going to close with number 323, singing verses 1 and 3, and then we'll have the dismissal prayer. There are still a couple of openings for people to take food to Ron and the family. It's for this Sunday, the 27th, and next Tuesday, the 29th. If you could, if anyone's here that could sign up tonight, or if you want to let Tress or I know so that we could mark that in accordingly. But there's 2 more spots. We would like to try and get, help out there to Ron and everyone. So 323 verses 1 and 3. I care not today what the morrow may bring, if shadow or sunshine or rain. The Lord I know ruleth o'er everything, and all of my worry is vain. Living by faith in Jesus above, trusting, confiding in his great love.
Yes, in his great love.
From all harm safe, in his sheltering arms. I'm living by faith, and feel no alarm. I know that he safely will carry me through, no matter what evils betide. Why should I then care through the tempest may blow, if Jesus walks close to my side? Living by faith in Jesus above, trusting, confiding in his great love.
Yes, in his great love.
From all harm safe, in his sheltering arms.
His sheltering arms.
I'm living by faith, and feel no alarm. Dear Lord and our Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the time of the year that many in the world will recognize and believe and come forward at times and go out to preach. But we know, Lord, that your Son lives with us all the time. May all of those traveling be safe, going and coming. May all of those that are sick and on the prayer list, which we have many here at our church, may they recover if it's your will, but if they be well taken care of, and knowing that there are people that care and love them, that should help and will help, we know, and we ask for that always. Be with Sean tonight as we go over the lesson, and that we can, those of us that'll be here on Sunday, can gather back for another time to learn and to serve and worship. We now pray and ask in his name. Amen.
Shall we need our jacket?
Love you. Proud of you. You hear all that? Love you, bud. He's very sensitive too. If you would have heard me telling you, he would have said he was in Paris. He said, if I were to become a Christian, what would I do? Because I can't read in order to lead singing. Did you hear him?
No, what was
Yeah.
that?
He said, if I become a Christian, what would I do? Because I can't read in order to lead singing. It was around this age.
That's a
It
good
was around
heart.
this age for all of them they started, and we would just say, "You're not ready yet." They say, "Okay." They just go. Like that's what we knew. Like okay, you know. And eventually the Lord threw repentance on the floor. As y'all know. But,
I mean, to have that, even that thought.
yeah.
You need that light? Oh, you had that off for a reason?
Yeah, it looks good.
You need these turned down?
I thought it looked good with the middle off, but
You in the cool?
yeah.
Oh, it's okay like that? Great.
Yeah,
Figured you
okay.
would. Or you
Yeah,
must be here.
if you guys can see that, then that's fine.
Yeah.
More dramatic.
Well, today we're going over Obadiah. Behind me, that slide there, spoiler alert if you haven't seen or read Obadiah before, but that is the nation of Edom, or a part of the nation of Edom. It is in ruins. Nobody lives there. Nothing is going to be bought or sold there. It was once a bustling city, or their capital was, important along the trade route, a trade route that went all the way to India, in fact. And so it's nothing now. And so we'll be getting into that. Just wanted to share that with, and we'll have more pictures later. But first of all, I wanted to go through a review of our previous lesson and ask what is the major overlying theme of the minor prophets? Major overlying theme of the minor prophets. Well, it's found in Proverbs 14, verse 34. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And so we want to keep that in the forefront of our minds as we read through the minor prophets. I'll just get my notes open here. And so righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach among any people. And so first of all, who was Obadiah as we open up his book? Well, first, his name means servant. It means a worshiper of Yahweh. And his writing concerned the nation of Edom, their mistakes, the consequences, and how justice would be served against them. This just so happens to be the shortest book of the minor prophets, actually, shortest book of the Old Testament, with one chapter, 21 verses. And so I had actually initially planned to have this in the same lesson as the introduction, but introduction took up the whole class period, and that's fine. But for that reason, it's the shortest book of the Old Testament. And it's introduced here as the vision of Obadiah. And that's all we know about the man Obadiah, is what he wrote, who he wrote to, and what his name means. The date of the book, we sort of got into this last week. There are different ideas about what date Obadiah was written. We do know that it came during a time where Edom is rejoicing and they are gloating over the fall of Judah. And if we turn over to Psalm, we have their attitude on display. In Psalm 137 and verse 7, where he says, "Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof." So these were men, this came after a time where Judah was hit somehow. And this leads to some to believe that it was written after 586 BC, after Judah had been taken into captivity. The Edomites, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, what was the psalm? I didn't
Psalm 137 and verse 7.
Thank you.
Okay. I thought I might have had it in the slide, but I didn't.
No, thank you.
So the Edomites had a hatred for Israel, and they would rejoice when Israel fell. But also note that it could have taken place around 845 BC, in the time of Jehoram, and that we have in 2 Chronicles chapter 21. Second Chronicles chapter 21 and verses 5 through 20. It says, Jehoram was 32 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel and did as did the house of Ahab. For he had the daughter of Ahab to wife, and he wrought that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Howbeit the Lord would not destroy the house of David because of the covenant that he had made with David, and as he promised to give a light to him and his sons forever. And then you have in verse 8, it says, in his days the Edomites revolted from under the dominion of Judah and made themselves a king. And Jehoram went forth with his princes and all his chariots with him, and he rose up by night and smote the Edomites which compassed him in, and the captains of the chariots. So the Edomites revolted under the hand of Judah unto this day. The same time also did Libnah revolt from under his hand, because he had forsaken the Lord God of his fathers. Moreover, he made high places in the mountains of Judah, and caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to commit fornication, and compelled Judah thereto. And so you have the Edomites once subject to Judah, but now they have revolted against of Judah and Israel and made themselves their own king. And so it is likely that this was the period of time in which Obadiah lived as well. But we'll also want to remember that the whole population of Judah was carried away in two different waves. First in 597 BC and another in 586 BC. So that kind of makes the dating of this book difficult. I don't want to talk so much about the date of the book. But Obadiah 19 and 20, some want to say that that Edom is rejoicing in the downfall of Judah to the Babylonians. But if we look at Obadiah 19 and 20, those two verses seem to indicate, some would say that it's talking about the Phoenician lowlands rather than anything that could have described Babylon. And then also in verses 11 and 12, we find that they looked at this opportunity to loot, to take over their possessions. And so they were actually helping the enemies locate and destroy those who had fled and had hidden out. We'll also want to note that the destruction of Jerusalem was not the only time that it was of its invasion. So there are several points in history that Edomites can look to and say and gloat over the fact that Judah has fallen. You'll have Shishak in 925 BC. We have that recorded for us in 1 Kings chapter 14, also 2 Chronicles 12. And then by the Philistines, the Arabians during the reign of Jehoram in 2 Chronicles 21. Then also by Jehoash, king of Israel, 790 BC, 2 Kings 14 and also 2 Chronicles 25. And also we have the one where leads many to believe it was written during or after 586, is by Nebuchadnezzar, which we read of in 2 Kings 24 through 25, and also, as we just read, Psalm 137 and verse 7. And so it's Wednesday night, and I know that's that's tiresome to you. Sorry about that. But we don't know exactly what date. Many say 586 BC. Also, we note that Amos and Jeremiah seem to mention Obadiah, and that could put him contemporary with them. I'll leave that up for just a second. Could have been during the time of Jehoram, and then we note that the whole population wasn't carried away at once. 2 Kings 8, 20 through 22. These slides are just mentioning how Amos and Jeremiah both mention Obadiah, and they could have been, these things kind of go parallel. If you look at these with Obadiah 1:14 and Amos 1:6, and Obadiah 1:4 and Amos 9:2, both speak the same language of bringing Edom down. Obadiah 1:19 and also Amos 9:12 talks about the possession of the land. It's seem to have parallel meanings to them. So let's get to something exciting. Yes, sir.
I think the date, though, is interesting for this reason. Not only just to deepen our knowledge and inquisitiveness regarding time frames and things like that, and to understand, where and the context of the work of books such as Obadiah, where maybe we're not 100% certain.
Right.
But I've mentioned before just the interest in things like The Mandalorian and Star Wars. And for those of you who don't know, the second season just ended, and it's a pretty interesting ending.
No spoilers.
Do what?
No spoilers.
No spoilers. Well, I won't spoil it then, because there is a pretty big spoiler, but I'll just say a very famous character that everybody knows is digitized in the last episode. And, Hannah and I are talking about it, and it happens to be that our children are as well, and there's a fascination with what's the time frame. So where does this fall? And you look at all the episodes, and literally there's a full breakdown amongst our family and discussion of when exactly did this happen. And a lot of that's just because we're interested in it, and it's exciting. So, I think that the dates, are interesting and relevant to us in general for obvious reasons, but then also just as it relates to our interest in being able to piece together as much as we can.
It's very true. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yep. So, we have, basically, I don't take a position on it. I just know there's several points in history that Edom could have been looking to gloat over the downfall of God's people. And that was one of the main things of one of their main sins was the gloating and the participation in the downfall of God's people. And we'll certainly look at that. But many do seem to think it's speaking of the Babylonian captivity, which puts it at the opposite end of the list that I had yesterday. Did you have your hand up? No? Okay, just scratching. That's fine. That's fine. So who was Edom? Well, Edom and Israel are actually related. There's a lot found about them in biblical history. It makes up a big deal of the Old Testament. Esau was the father of the Edomites. So you have Jacob and Esau, the account of Jacob versus Esau in Genesis chapter 25 and verses 23 through 26. And we see there that the rivalry between Jacob and Esau began in the womb. And from there on, it kept going. And God, in his providence, chose Jacob over Esau to be the physical and spiritual leader of his people. If we look at Romans, somebody could please read Romans chapter 9 and verses 10 through 13.
And not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one man, even by our father Isaac, for the children not yet being born, nor having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him who falls. It was said to her, the older shall serve the younger. As it is written, Jacob I love, but Esau I have hated.
So you have God choosing Jacob over Esau, and in just a brief rundown of the history between them, I could have been hidden this. Esau, we know the story, traded in his birthright for a bowl of soup in Genesis chapter 25. We have Isaac giving that blessing to Jacob in Genesis 27 instead of to Esau. a major point of contention. So in Genesis chapter 18, Esau has a plot to kill Jacob. And then we have the brothers reconciled there in Genesis chapter 32 and verse 33. So the rest of their history is actually marred by violence and hatred. And we have in Numbers chapter 20, and I can't remember what, there we go. Numbers 20 and verses 21, Edom refuses them passage. Remember, as I mentioned, they were located on a very important part of a trade route, or they were located on part of a very important trade route. And so they refused them passage through that area in Numbers chapter 20 and verses 21 when they were sojourning. You have David conquering and putting Edom into subjection in 2 Samuel chapter 8 and verses 13 and 14. And then as we just read, Edom gained its independence in 2 Kings 8 and verses 20 through 22. And so there's a long history between these people, between the sons of Jacob and the sons of Esau. Now the people of Edom were actually referred to as Idumeans during the Hellenistic period, or the Greek-controlled period. And so when we get into the New Testament times, you might hear about Idumea, or the Idumeans. Those were descendants of the Edomites, or also known as the Edomites. Herod himself was an Idumean by birth. And so a little bit of history behind him. His father, Antipater, was a friend of Julius Caesar. And Herod and his brother were given governorships by Caesar. Antipater also was given Roman citizenship, actually, and made a high priest and procurator in Judea. So if you could imagine what the Jewish people thought about that, about Rome taking an Edomite, one of their enemies, and putting him as a high priest, just appointing him there, and then later Herod ends up being on the throne over them. Just imagine how that felt to the Jewish people at that time. Yes, ma'am. Well, we read that the Edomites actually put up the high places in Judah, so they kind of fell off of that, if ever they were ever practicing. Am I right about that? I'm not sure they ever practiced Judaism.
It's funny because I was actually contemplating the same thing and was wanting to go back and study some more, because it's almost as if they're a Gentile people. I mean, they're from the seed of Abraham, but they're not of the line of Israel. So
right, we know they had Israel had rule over them, at least during David's time, but I think that was back in Chronicles. I think that was back in Chronicles where we read that they set up the high places in Judah, so they definitely weren't practicing Judaism there. Yep. So they were not friends with the Jews. So his brother was given governorship by, and by the way, the Romans and maybe other empires had the same way of doing things, but I'm thinking only the Romans that I know of specifically would rule different areas by setting up puppet kings. So they conquer a land, and they appoint a king over that land of who they believe is of the people of that land. Does that make sense? So I guess Julius Caesar thought that that he was a Jew, but I'm not sure about that. But he would set up Herod as a puppet king over Israel. Okay, yep, there it is in the slide. We have others that speak against, Obadiah wasn't the only prophet that spoke against Edom. We have Isaiah chapter 34, verses 5 through 6, Ezekiel 35:15, and also 36 and verse 5, also speaking out against Edom. And you also find them in secular history. These people existed. Their first appearance in secular records was actually found in the Merneptah stele, and that is dated from between 1224 and 1216 BC. You'll see it there. These are, if you don't know what a stele is, these are artifacts that they were written in cuneiform. Were written in hieroglyphics, whatever it be. Their Rosetta Stone is similar to that, but they would communicate things to the people, record history. And so Edom, their first appearance in secular records is found on this Merneptah stele, and which was discovered by Flinders Petrie. Probably pronounced that wrong. Flinders discovered it in 1896 in Thebes in Egypt. And it's also thought to be the first secular mention of Israel. The geography and the archaeology. Geography is it's of interest to us when we study this book. The territory of Edom, by the way, was different from that of Idumea because they were pushed north by the time they were known as Idumeans. But originally, they were situated here, and again, I've got it too small for you. But the little white bubble there, you see, is where Edom is. And it's situated in the area south of the Dead Sea between the Zered River and the Gulf Aqaba. And if you can tell from the map, I tried to zoom in on this one over here. It's a very mountainous region, very high and rugged terrain. And so it's roughly 60 miles south of the Dead Sea. And you have this city of Petra, also known as Sela, which served as the capital. And above you can hopefully see that. The city is literally carved out of rock. And there is a one single passageway into the city. It's about 2 miles, and it's this narrow right here. So if you could imagine trying to conquer that city in such a narrow passageway being the only way in. And we'll see when we open up the book that they were very high-minded people, thought nothing could touch them. And so that's why this is significant. Very mountainous terrain. You wouldn't think that they could be overthrown in such a situation, or how they're situated. And so roughly 60 miles south of the Dead Sea, you have the city of Petra. Their capital, it was rediscovered in 1812 by a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt. And like many of Edom's cities, Petra was literally hewn out of natural rock of the area. And this was a caravan city, very prosperous. In its day, you would have a lot of trading going on here, a lot of buying and selling. And so cities like Petra are interesting to us when we look at verses 34 and 3 and 4. There's no 34. Obadiah 3 and 4 says, "The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, Who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. And so that's interesting to us. They saw how they were situated, how they lived. They dwelled in the cleft of the rock, as he says. And if you could imagine being in their situation, they didn't have aircraft. They couldn't fly over and drop soldiers, couldn't bomb them or anything. They had to march in there. They were seemingly impenetrable. So they had a reason, if you're looking at it from a worldly standpoint, to be cocky about it and to think they can't be touched. But we'll find out that's not the case. So any comments or questions before we get into the text?
Isn't it just a reminder throughout all of this that, even like you mentioned last week, the sovereignty of God and the fact that He is the one that reigns.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, even the perspective of where it all started with Jacob and Esau. Jacob got what he got, but really he wasn't necessarily deserving of it from a secular perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It was by God's providence that all that came about. And so, again, I think it's just a reminder that we're always being humbled,
Right.
to our benefit, by the way, recognizing the power of God.
Yeah, they felt safe in that mountain, but that was God's mountain. So there's no reason to feel untouchable as they did. And there's no reason for any man to feel untouchable. So first of all, what was Obadiah's message to Edom? And I'll just go ahead and put how I've got this arranged here. First of all, in verses 1 through 9, you're going to see punishment. God's going to, and he says, I will. This is what's going to happen. Then the list of crimes, verses 10 through 14, thou shouldest not have, is what we'll read there. And then in verses 15 through 21, you have reparations, so there shall be. So punishment, I will. A list of crimes thou shouldest not have, and then reparations, there shall be. This is what's going to happen. So first of all, I will. And if, could I have somebody read, please, verses 1 through 8?
The vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Thou art greatly despised. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring thee down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as an eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. If thieves came to thee as robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If the grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave some grapes? How are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom, and understanding out of the mouth of Esau?
Right, and there in that also you have, being situated as they were up in the hills, in the rocks, in the cleft of the rock, you'd think there's a certain secrecy to them as well. But he says, how are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? And so you have the source of the punishment, first of all. Well, ultimately, it's God, because he says, I will do these things. I will perform these things. But he does it through people. In verses 1 through 2, you have her foes. are going to, behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Thou art greatly despised. And then in verse 7, we find even her friends, the men of thy confederacy, the men that are supposed to be her friends, have brought thee even to the border. Men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. And they that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. So we can understand her foes taking her down, but also her friends are taking her down. Some of the very nations they had agreements with would now turn against them, and they were completely clueless to what was being plotted behind their backs. We have the severity of the punishment there in verses 4 through 9. First of all, her wealth is removed. What an illustration we have there. Not a grape is going to be left when their enemies were done with them. And that it's around Christmas time right now. It kind of reminds me of the Grinch that stole Christmas. How he came back and he went up the chimney chute, and then you see his hand come out and grab the last crumb in the house. That's what it sort of reminds me of. That not a single grape would be left of their possessions. And you saw the slide. It's just ruins. There's nothing left there. But they were there, and God went through their stuff right under their nose. They couldn't do anything about it. Their own friends, their foes were against them. Her wealth was removed. And her wisdom, we see, was reduced in verses 8 through 9. Their thoughts were not higher than those of men. And where a nation places its strength, or when a nation places its strength in the minds of the people and their own military, they're going to have problems. Edom was no longer mentioned in history after the Jewish wars. If you're familiar with Josephus was the last historian to mention the Edomites or to speak of them. And so they are no more. You have the list of crimes in verses 10 through 14. Thou shouldest not have. If somebody could please read verses 10 through 14.
For violence against your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that strangers carried captive his forces, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, even you were as one of them. But you should not have gazed on the day of your brother in the day of his captivity, nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor should you have spoken proudly in the day of distress. You should not have entered the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Indeed, you should not have gazed on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. You should not have stood at the crossroads to cut off those among them who escaped, nor should you have delivered up those among them who remained in the day of distress.
And so here you have the list of crimes being listed, and one of those crimes was they stood and did nothing. They cast lots on Jerusalem, basically saying when the enemies come in and do all the work for us, we'd like to take a piece of that. They looked on approval of the disenfranchising of Israel, and they rejoiced at their destruction. Remember, we read in Psalm 137 in verse 7, they said, raise it to its very foundation. And then they spoke proudly in the day of distress, also being guilty of aiding and abetting Israel's enemies. And so, list of crimes, rejoicing What another thing that reminds me of is growing up, and if you remember, if you had siblings and your sibling got in trouble, you'd hear them getting whipped over it. And if you were like me, and I've changed since then, a little smile would creep creep up. But Edom was kind of acting like that when they saw the punishment of Israel, and that's not a good thing. They rejoiced in the downfall of these people, and this wasn't just the loss of land, it wasn't just the loss of property, it was the loss of life and the loss of freedom that they were rejoicing in. And so we will pick up next week on the reparations, there shall be, and then we'll get into the book of Joel. I appreciate everyone's attention this evening.